Okay, Pat. Hi, everybody. Welcome to number 2 in our human rights shareables. I'm so thrilled that people are taking advantage of this little opportunity. These are quick 20-minute introductions. We're focusing on the pieces of just Chapter 5, which is the standards to promote dignity, which is a chapter in our regulations that is most directly related to promotion and protection of human rights. So I'm just going to dive right in here, and you can use the chat box if you like. If we have time at the end, I will absolutely answer some questions. So just to review our goals for these series, we want to inform people about the contents and the meaning of our Chapter 5 regulations, Standards to Promote Dignity. And I do think it's relevant that they are called Standards to Promote Dignity and not Standards to Promote Human Rights, because remember, human rights, the idea of human rights is a strategy in order to ensure that everyone is treated with and experiences dignified living. These sessions are all recorded, so you can attend them here live, or you can go to ddslearning.com and view the recordings. This is only our second one, but we will have all of them in there as we do them once per month for the next 10 or 11 months. I divided Chapter 5 up into 11 or 12 different little sections. And then the purpose for all this, the real goal, is to help you to provide sort of formal and informal ways to reinforce the ideas of human rights among your staff, among families, and among the people you support. So that's the whole purpose of this. You're supposed to be offering some kind of human rights education every year, and we're hoping that these little 20-minute segments help you to get started on that. Whether you play them for people and then use our discussion questions as a jumping off point, or whether you look at them and take from it what you want, all of that is good. Any way you use them will be great. It's just that we want you to use them. So last time I spent a little time going through, well, let me just go through a process and then I'm going to zip through. So every week or every month, we will be doing 1 or 2 statements from Chapter 5. This month, we're doing the introduction and principles for Chapter 5.03, which is the real beginning of the statements of human rights. We're going to talk about what these statements mean as we go through and why they're important in our work. When we can, we'll have examples of positive supports for rights. I have a couple of ideas for today's statements. And then I have several questions I've put in here that you can use as discussion starters or just for your own sort of thoughtful reflection about the importance of human rights in our work. So last time we met, I went through all of the human rights safeguard system components. I'm not going to review those again, but I put them in this slide deck so you have one more opportunity to go through them and ask questions of people. We have a wonderful human rights safeguard system, by the way. I think it's grand if we use it the way it is intended to be used. Any system can be a failure if we don't use it correctly. And we know, because the research tells us so, that we have not made adequate use of our DPPC reporting structure. So we really need to do a better job on that, and perhaps we'll focus on that one topic in one of these shareables, but that's not for today. So what we are talking about today is Chapter 5.03, and this is just the introduction and the principles to Chapter 5.03. And I think that that's really important. My own belief here, and this is my opinion, is that if you only remember one thing, if you attend all of these and only remember one thing, the thing I want you to remember is the principles, because they form the foundation of everything else we do. So if we can really keep those principles actively in mind as we go forward and do our work, we will automatically do good work. And I think that that's super important. So this is simply the introduction to further the department's goal. I'm sorry, I'm cold, I'm shivering a little bit here. To further the department's goal of promoting the welfare and dignity of all persons with intellectual disability and developmental disabilities, the department hereby establishes the following principles. Keep in mind that these principles are directly related to our mission and the guiding principles of DDS, which should be also put into the ddslearning.com website, so you should be able to find them. These principles are a reference point for all of the other human rights work that we do with people, and therefore they should be guiding the work that we do every day. So principle number 1, services and supports are to be designed to provide meaningful assistance to the individual in acquiring and maintaining those physical, mental, and social skills which enable the individual to cope most effectively with the demands of his or her, or their, by the way, own person and environment. So let's break this down just a little bit. We know what services and supports are. That's everything we do in our work. What does meaningful assistance mean? Right? We know that our role is to teach people, so that by assistance, we need to understand that that means we don't just help people do stuff. Our job is to help them learn what they need to know, and even more so, what they want to know to best cope with the demands of their own life. So the concept of meaningful assistance, we need to remember, also means teaching people, not just assisting in sort of the traditional way we think of the term assisting. And the purpose is to help people gain and hang on to physical, mental, and social skills. So there are a lot of things we teach people. A lot of you folks are involved in the ISP process in one way or another, and writing smarter objectives, right? Measurable objectives, and helping people to achieve those things. Some of the things that they may be trying to achieve are physical skills. They might be trying to learn something, which is a mental skill, cognitive learning. And they might be trying to think about social skills, which has to do some kind with affective learning, right? What is important to them to learn is what social skills are about. And then the final part of this is the whole purpose of doing all this teaching and this effort is to help people cope, and I'm going to talk a little more about the term cope in a few minutes, to cope most effectively with the demands of their own person and their own life. We would love to believe that everybody's life is just based on what everybody just wants. We have to be honest with people, and that's not always the case. It's also about what they need. And so coping has to do with dealing with what you need to have in your life, right? So that's that part. One of my questions later on will be about what's the difference between coping and thriving, because I believe most of us are in this work because we want to support people to thrive in their lives, not just cope with their lives. So when I think about this principle, I just want to, checking my time here, I just want to I think about a couple of things that are important in our work every day. So the first thing I think about is positive behavior supports. Whenever we're talking about environment, we need to think about positive behavior supports, right? Because the purpose, one of the sort of the foundations of positive behavior supports is that we need to make sure the environment fits the person. It's not that this is not telling us that we have to make the person fit the environment, just cope with whatever environment they're dealt. Part of that is to make sure the environment is not so stressful for the person that they're constantly losing their cool, right? So when we think about helping people to cope in their environment, part of that is to help them build the environment that most meets their needs so that they can relax and learn and are not constantly stressed out. The other thing I think about here is person-centeredness, right? In PBS, we talk about that universal supports layer, and the universal supports are things that should be available to everybody all the time. That does not mean that the exact same things are available to every person. If you don't need something, then you don't need to have it available to you, but it's a concept of person-centeredness. What does that person need in their world so that they can cope best with the stuff that they're faced with, right? How do we help people do that? So I think that this one little statement says a lot about the bigger picture of what we are doing, or what we want to be doing in our work with people, which I think is really important. let's see, and I just want to note that I did add there to this, it says demands of his or her own person and environment. We do work with people who do not identify as a him, as a his or a her, and therefore we use more generalized pronouns like there is one of the probably most commonly used ones. And here's principle 2. There are only 2 principles, and they really encompass a whole bunch of stuff that helps guide the work that we do. So principle number 2 is that residential and day or employment settings are integrated in and support full access of individuals to the greater community, including opportunities to seek employment and work in competitive integrated settings, engage in community life, control personal resources, and receive services in the community to the same degree of access as other individuals. This is a checklist of everything we do in our work, isn't it? Yet the guiding principle is that we should be supporting people to have the same kind of lives that are available to anybody else that are outside of services. And then we sort of layer our services onto that life. I don't know how many people are familiar yet with charting the life course, but when you become familiar with that, and I'm guessing everyone at some point will start to learn about it, but the idea is that services don't surround the person. The person should be surrounded by their community and their family and their life. And then our services should be put in place within theirs here and there when they're needed. That's not the traditional way of thinking about services, but it is something that we need to be working towards, that services should not define the life. Services should actually enhance the life and support the person to pursue that life, whether that life includes employment, competitive employment in integrated settings, whether that includes engaging in community life in whatever way the person chooses to do that, whether that includes being in control of their own personal resources, financial and otherwise, and getting services in the community, any kind of service, whether the mailman or the local grocery store, whatever kind of service they're talking about in the community. So when we think about charting the life, when we think about helping people chart their life, right? In the last principle, we talked about building environment. When we think about helping people do that, this principle tells us exactly where we're going with this. Some of you know I'm a sexuality educator. So when I read engage in community life and control personal resources, I include in that pursuing personal, romantic, or sexual relationships, if that's part of what the person sees as the good life that they would like to pursue. We do have some work to do, right? We know this when we're talking about residential, day, or employment services. Some of our services are integrated, but we have a long way to go. We know that. We know that we have a long way to go to ensure that simply because a person lives in a group home setting should not limit them or deny them access to their broader community, that they should get to know their neighbors just like everybody else. If a person uses a day service, the day service should help the people get out into the world. I mean, we know that, we always know there are ways we can improve on that. But the concept of integration into the bigger world is sort of built into our philosophy of the work, is to not separate people, but to help people become part of the world that they live in. Let's see, employment and competitive employment. Let me, this thing pop. Sorry, this little screen thing keeps popping into the middle of the words here, and I can't get rid of it. There it goes. Anyway, how are we doing? Okay. So getting work in competitive. Right now, people have opportunities, right? If they feel comfortable going out and seeking employment, there's a whole lot of opportunities for employment out there right now. So this might be a really good opportunity to really go after that as we come out of, my fingers are crossed, as we come out of the pandemic, right? Okay, so to me, that's as much as I'm going to do there, because I do want to just walk through the questions that I wrote down, because I think these are wonderful things these principles are wonderful things to start conversations about. So here's some discussion starters for you. Why is it important to identify principles on which our services and supports are built? Are these same principles also in the DDS mission statement and guiding principles, which you'll find when they're able to get it into DDS Learning, you'll find them there. You can also find them on mass.gov, you know that, but they're nice and pretty in DDS Learning when they get them in there. And then what are other principles can you think of are important in our work? Those two are very comprehensive. You may identify something that you have noticed in your work that's a sort of a foundational principle of your work that isn't covered in those two general principles. Principle 1 is about our duty to provide learning opportunities for individuals to acquire and maintain a variety of skills. What mechanisms does DDS have to ensure that learning takes place? Really important. And what mechanisms are built into our or your organization to support learning? And it might not just be the ISP. There's a whole bunch of things I'm sure you folks do to make sure the learning happens. And the ISP is the written part of it. I don't know why this keeps popping in there. Okay. Principle 1 identifies the purpose of skill development as, quote, coping with the demands of the person's life and environment. What's the difference between coping and thriving? And that's the big question I really want you to think about. What's the difference between coping and thriving? I'm sorry, I don't know why this little thing keeps popping into the middle of the page. And then what concrete ways do staff support people served to thrive as a person and within their environment? Principle 2 talks about integration and full access to the greater community as essential to the quality and purpose of our services. Thinking about the work you or we do, how do we all operationalize this principle? And what are some examples of this principle in action? In what ways can we improve the integration and full access of the person to the greater community with and for the individuals that we serve? Good questions to ask, whether you're in a staff meeting or whatever situation you're in, a house meeting with the people who live there. Just some questions to help you get going. And absolutely, you can ask them any way you want. You don't have to use my language for sure. Principle 2 offers several examples of the areas where integration and full access must apply: competitive employment, community life, personal resources, service participation. Does this apply equally to all people served? We sometimes say, oh, that won't work for so-and-so. Well, it's still a valid principle. It may look different for this person, if we think about person-centeredness, than it would for a different person. So what does this quote look like when a person has very significant physical or intellectual impairment, behavioral challenges? How can you respond to someone who says, that doesn't apply to the person I work with? And with a minute to spare, protection of rights is all about promoting human dignity, and that's what Chapter 5 is all about. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Have a good one. I'm done. And I'm sorry, I didn't leave time for questions.